When did you watch someone die over FaceTime? My daughter was on a cabin trip with her dad when she FaceTimed me crying. Mommy, the left side of my tummy hurts really bad. I was 7,000 miles away on base in Germany, but I knew that face. Show me where, baby. She pointed to her lower right side. Classic appendicitis symptom. Then she turned the phone and I watched her vomit off the side of the porch. My medical training kicked in immediately. Where's Daddy? He went hunting with Uncle Pete and the guys. Won't be back until tomorrow night. Her voice was getting weaker. Ashley's here watching us. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Ashley was his 22-year-old girlfriend who he'd been dating for 3 months. Put Ashley on the phone, please. The phone shook as Leah limped inside. Ashley was painting another kid's nails, with a beer bottle in her hand. She barely looked up. Hey, Leah's not feeling great. You need to take her to the hospital. Now. Ashley laughed. She's fine. Kids get tummy aches. Listen to me. I'm a combat medic. She's showing signs of appendicitis. Lower right quadrant pain, vomiting. She's holding her side when she walks. Yeah, I'm not doing all that. She went back to the nail polish. First off, I don't have permission to take someone else's kid anywhere. Second, your ex told me about you. How you're psycho and always starting drama. I'm not falling for it. My hands were shaking. This isn't drama. Her appendix could rupture. Even if I wanted to, which I don't, we're 2 hours from any hospital. I can't leave anyway. I'm watching Brad's son, too. I tried to stay calm. Then call an ambulance. To his private property? Yeah, right. He'd flip out. Plus, there's no actual address out here, just the Forest Service road markers. Over the next 4 hours, I called everyone I could think of. The ranger station couldn't enter private property without owner permission or visible emergency, and Ashley told them everything was fine when they radioed. I called 911, but they needed an address Ashley wouldn't give me. I even called my ex's brother, but he said, not getting in the middle of your custody crap again. Leah's signal was drifting in and out as she tried to find anywhere with service. Every time I saw her, she looked worse. She couldn't even keep water down. And by hour 6, she stopped being able to walk to the service spot. Ashley sent me one text. She's being dramatic for attention because Daddy's not here. Stop encouraging her. I was screaming at my commanding officer, begging for emergency leave, when the next video came through. It was from Brad Jr., my ex's son. My daughter was on the bathroom floor, curled in a fetal position. Her lips were gray. Ashley says she's faking, but she looks really bad, he whispered. I called 3 military buddies who lived within 200 miles, begging them to drive out there. But without an address, they couldn't find it. I offered Ashley $5,000, then $10,000 just to drive Leah to the hospital. She said I was trying to bribe her into kidnapping. I had Leah try to make herself throw up, thinking it might relieve pressure, but it only made the pain worse. I even tracked down the local fire chief's personal cell, but he said without the property owner's permission or a specific address, his hands were tied. When my ex finally returned from hunting 14 hours after that first call, Leah's appendix had already ruptured. By the time he got her to the hospital, she'd gone septic. The infection had spread everywhere, from the origin up throughout her torso and into her extremities. At the hospital, he told them he'd just returned from a quick supply run and found her like this. Of course, Ashley backed up his story completely. They played their parts perfectly. The doctor pulled my ex-husband aside and I heard it all over the phone that he'd finally answered. Mr. Leak, the doctor started, you stated you found her in this condition after a quick supply run. Yet the level of infection suggests that the rupture occurred approximately 10 to 12 hours ago. Your daughter's organs are shutting down. Are you lying to me, Mr. Leak? I practically heard my ex-husband's heart skip a beat. He started shifting the blame immediately. This all happened because my ex-wife didn't ensure proper medical supervision, he spat out. She knew I was going camping with Leah and she didn't arrange appropriate care. Sir, your daughter needed immediate medical attention hours ago. I fail to see how this correlates with your ex-wife. My ex-husband was audibly panicking now. It correlates because her mother failed to arrange proper care. I want that documented. Before the doctor could respond, my ex was screaming about insurance policies, custody care, and my supposed PTSD. The doctor stopped his questioning entirely. Even worse, 3 days later, the infection reached Leah's brain. The swelling caused massive damage before they could control it. My baby girl, my brilliant, funny, perfect daughter, would need machines to breathe for her, to eat for her, to keep her heart beating. The doctor said she might never wake up. I was on a transport flight home when I got the court summons. My ex was filing for sole medical decision-making power, citing my negligent failure to ensure proper medical protocols. That's when something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped into place. I'd been trained for war, and he had no idea what was about to hit him. The transport wheels hit the tarmac and I was already unbuckling before we stopped rolling. My escort, some kid fresh out of basic, was scrambling to keep up as I grabbed my bag and headed for the exit. I had 14 hours of notes spread across military letterhead, every minute of that night written down with times and details. The drive to the hospital took 40 minutes but felt like hours. Walking into the PICU knocked the wind out of me harder than any combat zone ever had. Leah was hooked to more machines than I'd seen on guys we'd pulled off the battlefield. The breathing tube, the feeding tube, monitors tracking every heartbeat, every breath the machine forced into her lungs. The doctor confirmed what I already knew from the phone calls. Septic shock had hit every organ. Multi-organ failure. The infection had reached her brain and caused swelling that might never go away. I stood at attention while he talked, using every trick from training to keep myself upright instead of falling apart. The hospital administrator showed up 20 minutes later with a stack of papers, and there was my ex already sitting in the conference room. He waved his emergency motion papers around, telling everyone he was the primary parent, and I'd been gone for months. He'd filed for sole medical decision-making power and wanted it done today. I kept my voice steady and told them I'd be fighting this immediately. 4 hours later, the doctor pulled me into an empty room and opened Leah's chart on his computer. He pointed to the timeline, showing me when the rupture happened based on the infection levels. It matched exactly when I'd first called from Germany. His notes said that getting her to the hospital right away would have stopped the infection from reaching her brain. He turned away while I took pictures of every single page with my phone. My commanding officer called that evening to confirm my emergency leave was approved. 30 days to start, with extensions possible if the legal stuff wasn't done. The relief of being here mixed with panic about the clock already ticking. I had to move fast, and I had to move smart. The next morning, Viviana Booth from the hospital social services knocked on the PICU door. She'd been assigned to our case and wanted to explain how contested medical guardianship worked. She handed me a thick folder with resources, phone numbers, and a list of lawyers who handled emergency custody changes. Her kindness almost broke through my military wall, but I held it together. I was walking back from the cafeteria when the process server found me. My ex had filed his motion claiming I abandoned Leah by choosing deployment over parenting. The actual words on the paper said I chose career over child, and failed to make sure she had proper care. I made it to the bathroom just in time to throw up from pure rage. When I came back out, something had changed inside me. I was ice cold and ready for war. That night in my hotel room, I spread out every phone bill and started writing. I documented every single call from that night, writing down exact times and who I called. 43 calls in 4 hours. I wrote down the exact amounts I offered Ashley to drive Leah to the hospital, first $5,000, then $10,000. I transcribed every text, including Ashley's message calling Leah dramatic. I noted the exact times I called 911, the ranger station, the fire chief's personal cell. Military training had taught me that documentation wins battles, and this was going to be my weapon. The next morning was the first family meeting in the ICU. The neurologist went through the brain damage while my ex sat there playing the perfect worried father. The swelling had caused permanent damage to multiple areas. When the doctor mentioned that we might need to talk about withdrawing life support if she didn't improve, my ex jumped in immediately saying he wanted everything possible done to keep her alive. He shot me this look that said he was already planning to paint me as wanting to pull the plug on our daughter. I asked for everything to be documented in writing, every word of the meeting. The nurse started typing while my ex's face got red. Then he started his attack right there in front of everyone. He told them about my supposed PTDT issues and suggested I wasn't mentally stable enough to make medical decisions for Leah. He said combat had messed me up, and I couldn't think clearly about what was best for her. The medical staff looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. I stayed calm and told them I was a decorated combat medic with 0 mental health flags on my military record. I'd been cleared by psych every single year and had perfect evaluations. The neurologist cleared his throat and said we should focus on Leah's care, not personal attacks. My ex kept pushing, saying I'd been gone for months and didn't know what Leah needed. The social worker was taking notes the whole time, and I could see her writing down every word he said. He was digging his own hole and didn't even realize it. After the meeting ended, I went straight to the hospital parking garage to make calls from the list Viviana gave me. The third attorney I called was Eliza Haney, and when I explained the situation, she told me to come to her office right now, not tomorrow. Right now. I drove 20 minutes to a small law office downtown and walked in with my folder of documentation already organized by date and time. Eliza was maybe 45 with sharp eyes, and when she saw my phone record showing 43 calls in 4 hours, her whole face changed. She started taking notes immediately while I showed her the screenshots of Ashley's texts calling Leah dramatic and the video Brad Jr. sent of my daughter on that bathroom floor. Her brother Rainer did private investigation work, and her partner Matthias handled medical malpractice cases, which meant I'd found exactly the team I needed. She filed an emergency response to my ex's motion that afternoon and scheduled depositions for everyone involved, including Ashley and Brad Jr. The next morning, the hospital administrator called me to say they'd implemented a new policy requiring both parents to consent to any major medical decisions until the court ruled, which meant my ex couldn't make unilateral choices about withdrawing support or moving Leah to a different facility. It was a small win, but the clock was still ticking on Leah's condition, and we all knew every day mattered. Eliza and I spent the next 6 hours in her conference room preparing my declaration, and we documented every single attempt I made to get help that night, including the call to his brother, who refused to get involved. We attached the phone records showing exact times and durations, the screenshots of Ashley's messages, the video from Brad Jr., transcripts of my calls to 911, and the ranger station, even the text where I offered Ashley $10,000 to drive Leah to the hospital. The stack of evidence was already 3 inches thick, and we were just getting started. That evening, the ICU nurse pulled me aside while I was doing range of motion exercises on Leah's legs, and told me her infection markers were finally stabilizing, though the neurological damage remained severe. She mentioned my ex only visited during business hours, usually 9 to 5, while I'd been there 18 hours a day since arriving. I asked if she could document that in her notes, and she gave me this look that said she understood exactly what was happening. 3 days later, we had the scheduling conference at the courthouse, and the judge denied my ex's request for immediate sole custody, but set an evidentiary hearing for 3 weeks out. Eliza argued successfully for expedited discovery given Leah's critical condition, and my ex's lawyer looked annoyed at the tight timeline because it meant less time to prepare their defense. The judge also ordered the appointment of a guardian ad litem to represent Leah's interests independently, and selected Hugh Griffith, who was a former pediatric nurse turned attorney. Having a neutral party who would focus solely on what was best for Leah felt like the first real protection she'd had since this nightmare started. Ronald Waller from JAG reached out to me that week after my commanding officer contacted him about my situation. He helped me navigate the military protections available to service members in custody disputes, and assisted with getting affidavits from my commanding officers, attesting to my mental fitness and exemplary service record. Having the weight of the military behind me with official documentation countering my ex's PTSD accusations felt like calling in air support when you're pinned down. The hospital security updated their visitor policy after I provided Viviana with evidence of Ashley's negligence during that night at the cabin, and she was removed from the approved visitor list pending the investigation. My ex threw a massive fit in the lobby when security wouldn't let Ashley up to see Leah, and the whole thing was captured perfectly on the security cameras. Viviana documented his aggressive behavior in her report, including him screaming at the security guard and having to be escorted out by 3 officers. Raynor started working with a digital forensics expert to preserve all the metadata from the FaceTime calls that night, showing exact times and durations of each call. The expert verified that none of the videos had been edited and created a chain of custody document that would hold up in court. Every second of that horrible night was becoming evidence, and the timeline was devastating to my ex's version of events. Eliza filed subpoenas for the county property records to establish the exact GPS coordinates of the cabin, and the records showed it was a well-documented property, with clear access roads and a registered address. The property had been in my ex's family for 15 years, and emergency services had responded there twice before for other incidents. His claim that it was some impossible-to-find location that emergency services couldn't reach was completely destroyed by the official county records showing exact directions and even photos of the property entrance. The next morning, Eliza called me with more good news as I was adjusting Leah's feeding tube at the hospital. The ranger station had sent their official radio logs from that night, and they were damning. The timestamp showed Ashley telling them everything was fine at 9:47 p.m., the exact same time my phone records showed Leah had been vomiting for 2 straight hours. The ranger who took the call remembered it clearly because Ashley had been laughing in the background while he asked about the sick child. He signed an affidavit stating he would have responded immediately if she hadn't assured him multiple times that the kid was just being dramatic. I printed out the logs and added them to my growing binder of evidence while the machines keeping my daughter alive beeped steadily around us. The phone company delivered their certified records that afternoon, and I spread them across the hospital room's small table. 43 calls in 4 hours, starting at 7:32 p.m. when Leah first called me crying. The duration column told the whole story. 17 calls to emergency services, 8 to my ex's phone that went unanswered, 6 to his brother, 4 to military friends, 3 to the fire department, and 5 to Ashley begging her to help. The longest call was 27 minutes to 911, where I stayed on trying to give them any landmark I could remember from past visits, while they kept saying they needed a real address. My ex's lawyer had been claiming I failed to ensure proper care, but these records painted a different picture entirely. Raynor called me 2 days later with information that made me put down the sponge I was using to clean Leah's face. He'd been digging into the hunting license database and found something interesting about check-in requirements at certain stations. My ex had checked in at Willow Creek Station at 6:15 a.m. that morning, which was 2 hours from the cabin, and the records showed he didn't check out until 9:45 p.m. when he finally headed back. That meant he'd been gone for over 15 hours, not the quick supply run he'd told the doctors about. The hunting regulations required these check-ins for safety tracking, and the digital system had perfect timestamps that couldn't be altered. I watched Leah's chest rise and fall with the ventilator, while Raynor explained that this proved my ex knew exactly how long he'd been gone and had deliberately lied to medical staff about his absence. Ashley's social media turned into our biggest gift when Raynor got access through a mutual friend who was disgusted by what had happened. The photos started at 7 p.m. that night, with her doing shots with a caption about babysitting being more fun with tequila. At 8:15 p.m., she posted a photo of beer bottles lined up on the table where she was painting Brad Jr.'s friend's nails, the same table where Leah had been trying to tell her about the pain. At 10:30 p.m., there was a video of her dancing in the cabin's living room with music blasting, while my daughter was curled up on a bathroom floor dying. Each post had timestamps and location tags that placed her at the cabin during the exact hours she was supposed to be taking care of sick children. Raynor downloaded everything and created a timeline showing her drinking escalating as Leah's condition worsened. Alfonso Guerrero spent 6 hours reviewing Leah's complete medical file at my request, and his findings made my hands shake as I read his report. He confirmed the appendix had ruptured between 8 and 9 p.m. based on the progression of infection found during surgery. If Leah had received medical attention within even 4 hours of rupture, the infection wouldn't have reached her brain. He wrote that the 14-hour delay was directly responsible for the septic shock that caused the brain swelling and subsequent damage. His medical opinion stated clearly that this was a preventable tragedy caused by failure to seek timely medical care. I paid his consultation fee knowing his expertise would demolish any claim that this was unavoidable. Eliza reached out to Brad Jr.'s mother, who was horrified when she learned the full story. She provided a written statement describing how her son had called her that night scared because Leah looked really sick, but Ashley kept telling him to stop being dramatic. She included screenshots of texts where Brad Jr. wrote that he thought Leah might die, and Ashley just laughed at him. She agreed to let him provide testimony with a child advocate present because she wanted the truth known about what her son witnessed. The statement included her own concerns about Ashley that she'd raised with my ex before, but he'd dismissed as jealousy. Siobhan August from CPS showed up at the hospital 3 days later with a thick folder and serious expression. The hospital had filed a mandatory report about medical neglect, and she was opening a formal investigation. She interviewed me for 2 hours while I maintained Leah's care routine, asking detailed questions about the timeline while observing how I interacted with my daughter. I showed her my binder of evidence, walked her through each phone call, and maintained military bearing throughout, despite wanting to scream about the injustice. She took photos of all my documentation and said she'd be interviewing my ex next. When she returned the following week, she mentioned his story had changed 3 times during their conversation about why he was gone so long, and when he actually returned to the cabin. I started therapy with Beryl Snow specifically to create documentation countering my ex's PTSD claims. She conducted a thorough assessment and noted my appropriate grief responses, my ability to compartmentalize during crisis, and my clear thinking despite the trauma. Every session became part of the record showing I was mentally stable and processing the situation in a healthy way. She wrote detailed notes about my coping mechanisms developed through military training and how I was channeling my emotions into productive action rather than destructive behavior. Hugh Griffith arrived at the hospital on a Tuesday morning and spent 3 hours observing my interactions with Leah. I showed him the range of motion exercises I did to prevent muscle atrophy, demonstrated how I monitored her vitals and knew what each reading meant, and explained the medication schedule I'd memorized within 2 days. He watched me talk to her about everything from the weather to memories of better times, noting how the nurses often asked my opinion about her care because of my medical background. I answered every question honestly, showing him my documentation, explaining my actions that night, and admitting my guilt about being so far away when she needed me. He took extensive notes and said he'd be interviewing my ex the next day. Eliza called me that evening after Hugh interviewed my ex, and she could barely contain her satisfaction. My ex had contradicted himself multiple times, first saying he'd rushed back as soon as he got a message, then claiming he hadn't received any calls, then finally admitting he'd seen missed calls but thought they were about custody drama. When Hugh asked about the 14-hour absence, my ex couldn't explain why the hunting checkout time didn't match his story about returning earlier. Hugh's poker face was legendary, but Eliza said she saw him writing furiously when my ex claimed he'd only been gone for a few hours, despite the official records showing otherwise. The next morning, a nurse knocked on the door while I was doing Leah's range of motion exercises and told me the ethics committee wanted to meet with both parents about long-term care planning. I walked into that conference room 2 hours later and saw 5 people in suits sitting around a table with folders and tablets spread out like we are planning a military operation. The lead committee member, a woman with gray hair pulled back tight, started explaining how decisions get made when a child needs life support indefinitely. She talked about quality of life assessments, probable outcomes based on brain scans, and the process for determining what happens if Leah's condition doesn't improve. My ex sat there nodding like he understood any of it while I took notes on everything, writing down medical terms to research later, asking about specific protocols and timelines. They showed us forms about DNR orders and withdrawal of care that made my stomach turn, but I kept my face blank, focusing on the facts instead of the image of my daughter hooked to those machines. 3 days later, I was walking back from the cafeteria when I saw my ex in the corridor with Ashley, even though she'd been banned from the visitor list after we provided evidence of her drinking that night. He was loud, waving his arms around, clearly trying to get me to react in front of witnesses. Ashley stood there smirking while he yelled something about me poisoning everyone against him. Security showed up within 30 seconds, 2 guards who'd gotten to know me over the weeks I'd been living at the hospital. They told Ashley she had to leave immediately, or they'd call the police, and one of them pointed at the camera in the corner, letting me know the whole thing was recorded. I kept walking, didn't say a word, just maintained the same steady pace I'd learned in basic training, while my ex screamed that I was destroying his life. Later that week, Eliza called to tell me the Freedom of Information request had come through with all the emergency service logs from that night. The fire department had tried to respond 3 times, but each attempt was marked property owner refused access in their system. The ranger station logs showed 4 separate radio contacts where they tried to check on Leah, but Ashley told them everything was fine. The fire chief had even added personal notes to his report saying he wanted to send a unit anyway, but couldn't legally enter private property without permission or visible signs of emergency from the road. Each timestamp lined up perfectly with my phone records showing when I'd called begging for help. The cell phone company's technical expert came to Eliza's office to explain what the tower data meant, spreading out these maps with dots and lines showing Leah's phone pinging different towers. He traced her path with his finger, showing how she'd walked the same route 12 times trying to find signal, each attempt getting shorter as she got weaker. The last successful connection was 6 hours before my ex got her to the hospital, right when Brad Jr. sent me that video of her on the bathroom floor. The expert said the pattern was consistent with someone in medical distress desperately trying to get help, not a kid being dramatic for attention like Ashley had claimed. Eliza filed for a protective order the next day, and the judge signed it immediately based on our evidence. Ashley was prohibited from providing care for any minor children while the investigation continued, which meant my ex couldn't use her as a babysitter anymore even for his son. The order specifically cited her drinking while supervising children, and her refusal to seek medical care for a child in obvious distress. My ex's lawyer tried to argue it was excessive, but the judge cut him off, saying any reasonable person would have called 911. That evening, I sat in my hotel room with 3 legal pads, my laptop, and every piece of documentation we'd collected, writing out a timeline for the court in my own words. Military report writing had trained me to be precise, so I listed every call, every text, every minute that passed while my daughter's appendix was rupturing. I cross-referenced each claim with supporting evidence, noting which exhibits proved each point. No emotions, no accusations, just facts laid out in chronological order with medical terminology explained in simple terms. It took me 4 nights to finish, but when I gave it to Eliza, she said it was better than what most lawyers produce. The county GIS department responded to our subpoena with the exact GPS coordinates and parcel number for the cabin, along with aerial photos showing the main road and 2 clear access points for emergency vehicles. The address had been in their system for 15 years, complete with a 911 locator that would have directed any ambulance straight there. Process servers could now deliver subpoenas to everyone who'd been at the cabin that weekend, and the impossible-to-find excuse my ex kept using fell apart completely. During his deposition, the property owner sat across from Matthias and answered every question honestly. He said there were no restrictions on emergency vehicles, no locked gates, no agreements preventing ambulance access to his property. He'd actually had paramedics respond there twice before, once for a broken leg and once for an allergic reaction. When Matthias asked if my ex had ever mentioned rules about emergency services, the owner looked confused and said he'd never discussed anything like that with anyone. The hospital's electronic records audit revealed something that made Alfonso update his expert report immediately. My ex hadn't checked Leah in until 2:47 a.m., but the hunting check-in records showed he'd returned to the cabin at 11:30 p.m. That meant he'd waited over 3 hours before taking her to the hospital, probably hoping she'd get better on her own, or trying to figure out his story. Alfonso added an addendum stating this additional delay caused more organ damage and increased the severity of the brain swelling. The digital forensics expert finished authenticating Brad Jr.'s video, confirming the metadata hadn't been altered and the timestamp was accurate. The video showed Leah gray and barely conscious at 8:15 p.m., when my ex was still claiming everything was under control. Brad Jr.'s shaky camera work and whispered words painted a clear picture of a scared kid who knew something was seriously wrong while the adult in charge did nothing. 3 weeks later, Ashley sat in the deposition room fidgeting with her phone while Matthias laid out printed screenshots from her Instagram. The first photo showed her holding a beer bottle at 4:32 p.m. that day with the caption, "Babysitting vibes." She tried to say it was from a different day, but the metadata proved otherwise. Matthias pulled up the next photo showing 3 more empty bottles on the table at 7:15 p.m. Ashley started crying and said she only had a couple. Then he showed the ranger station log where she told them everything was fine at 6:47 p.m. She couldn't explain why she didn't mention Leah was sick. When Matthias asked why she didn't call 911, she said she didn't think appendicitis was that serious. She actually used the words, "the mom was being dramatic," in her sworn testimony. The court reporter typed every word, while Ashley kept contradicting herself about whether she had permission to take kids to the hospital or not. First she said she couldn't without permission, then admitted she'd driven Brad Jr. to urgent care for a bee sting 2 weeks earlier. Matthias showed her the text where she called me psycho and asked her to explain what she meant. She said my ex told her I always made up emergencies for attention. The whole thing took 4 hours, and by the end, Ashley had admitted she never even checked on Leah after 8 p.m. 2 days after that, Siobhan from CPS showed up at my ex's house without warning at 7 a.m. She found dirty dishes piled in the sink and no food in the fridge except beer and condiments. The spare bedroom where Leah would supposedly stay had boxes stacked to the ceiling. There was no medical equipment anywhere. No wheelchair ramp for the front steps. No hospital bed. Not even basic supplies like medical gloves or gauze. Siobhan took photos of everything, including the expired children's Tylenol in the medicine cabinet from 2019. She asked my ex to show her his preparation for Leah's return, and he pointed to a regular twin bed with no rails. Meanwhile, I'd already rented a full hospital bed with electric controls and had contractors scheduled to install a ramp at my apartment. I'd taken classes on operating feeding tubes and managing ventilator settings. Siobhan documented all of this in her report. The next morning, Hugh Griffith arrived at the hospital at 6 a.m. to watch my daily routine with Leah. I was already there doing range of motion exercises on her legs to prevent muscle atrophy. I moved each joint slowly through its full range while talking to her about the weather outside. Hugh watched me check her feeding tube placement and flush it properly before her morning nutrition. When the respiratory therapist came in, I knew every setting on the ventilator and caught a small adjustment that needed to be made. The nurses let me help with her position changes to prevent bed sores. I knew which side she'd been on last and how long until the next turn. Hugh took notes while I coordinated with the speech therapist about oral care and the physical therapist about her exercise schedule. He stayed for 6 hours watching me manage every aspect of her care. The nurses told him I was there every single day from 6 a.m. until 10 p.m. One nurse mentioned that the other parent only came during visiting hours and usually stayed less than an hour. A week later, both parents had to meet with the hospital ethics panel about Leah's long-term care. My ex showed up in a suit and gave a speech about never giving up hope and doing everything possible. He used phrases like miracles happen and she's a fighter, but never asked about her current condition. When they asked about quality of life, he said that wasn't relevant. I brought Leah's brain scans and asked specific questions about her comfort level. I wanted to know if she could feel pain and if we were managing it properly. I asked about the latest research on minimally conscious states and whether we should try new therapies. The panel noted that I was the only one asking about palliative care options to keep her comfortable. My ex accused me of wanting to kill our daughter right there in the meeting. The panel had to call security to escort him out. That same afternoon, my ex's attorney filed a motion to exclude my therapy records from evidence. Eliza called me laughing because the motion basically admitted they'd gotten the records and found nothing bad in them. The motion claimed the therapy notes were irrelevant and prejudicial, but really they showed I was handling an impossible situation well. Beryl Snow had documented that I showed appropriate grief responses and excellent coping strategies. I wasn't having breakdowns or showing signs of severe PTSD like my ex claimed. Eliza filed a response saying if they opened the door to mental health, we'd use Beryl's full evaluation showing I was completely stable. The motion got withdrawn 2 days later. Brad Jr.'s statement finally came through under seal with full juvenile protection. Eliza couldn't show me the actual document but said it was devastating for their case. He described begging Ashley to help Leah and being told to stop being dramatic just like her mother. He said Ashley was on her 4th or 5th beer when Leah started throwing up. He'd wanted to call 911 himself but Ashley took his phone away. He described Leah crawling to the bathroom because she couldn't walk, and Ashley not even getting up from the couch. His timeline matched mine perfectly down to the minute. Alfonso Guerrero submitted an expanded analysis that made me want to throw up. He explained that the window between rupture and sepsis was crucial, and every hour of delay doubled the risk of brain involvement. He created a chart showing that if Leah had gotten treatment within 2 hours of rupture, she had a 95% chance of full recovery. After 4 hours, it dropped to 70%. After 8 hours, only 40%. By the time my ex took her in after 14 hours, plus the additional delay, the chance of avoiding brain damage was less than 5%. He stated clearly that those 14 hours of negligence stole Leah's entire future. Hugh Griffith's preliminary report came in recommending shared medical decision-making with the hospital as tiebreaker. He wrote that I showed exceptional medical knowledge and consistent presence but couldn't ignore my ex's parental rights. He noted my ex showed up for scheduled meetings but had no understanding of Leah's actual medical needs. The report said I was clearly the more involved parent, but the law required considering both parents. It wasn't the sole custody I wanted, but it meant my ex couldn't make unilateral decisions about removing life support or refusing treatment. 3 days before the hearing, the judge's clerk called to schedule and warn both parties about courtroom behavior. The judge had reviewed the preliminary filings and noted this case involved serious allegations of medical neglect with tragic consequences. He would not tolerate outbursts or accusations in his courtroom. Any party who couldn't maintain composure would be removed. The gravity in the clerk's voice gave me hope that the judge was taking this seriously. That night, Eliza called with news that made her laugh out loud. My ex's attorney had reached out with a settlement offer. He would keep sole custody if I dropped all accusations about that night and agreed to supervised visitation only. Eliza said it showed they knew they were losing badly. No innocent person offers to settle when they're winning. We sent back a counteroffer demanding supervised visitation for him only and full medical decision-making for me. They rejected it within an hour, but now we knew they were scared. The night before the hearing, I sat in Eliza's conference room with her and Matthias going over every single question they might ask me. They had me practice my answers 20 times until I could say them without thinking. Matthias kept reminding me to breathe between sentences and look at the judge, not my ex. Eliza made me go through the timeline of that night over and over until I could recite every phone call and text message by memory. I put on my dress uniform that night and stood in front of the hotel mirror practicing my testimony one more time. The next morning, the courthouse was packed and my ex was already there with his lawyer looking confident. The hearing started with arguments about what evidence could be used. My ex's lawyer kept objecting to our phone records and medical reports, but the judge shut him down fast. He ruled that everything was admissible, including the videos, the texts, and all the medical records. My ex's face went white when the judge said the social media posts could be used too. When I took the stand, Eliza walked me through the event step by step. I showed the court my phone log with 43 calls in 4 hours. Then she put up the hunting check-in records on the big screen showing my ex was 2 hours away when Leah first got sick. His lawyer tried to shake me during cross-examination, asking if I was sure about the times, if maybe I was confused because of the time difference. I stayed calm and answered each question with exact times down to the minute. The judge was writing notes the whole time I talked. When Ashley took the stand, everything fell apart for them. Matthias showed her the social media posts with timestamps proving she was drinking while watching the kids. She started crying and admitted she didn't think it was that serious. She actually said she thought I was just trying to ruin their weekend. The ranger log showed she told them everything was fine when Leah was already throwing up blood. By the time Matthias was done, she was sobbing and saying she was sorry over and over. Alfonso took the stand next and explained exactly what happened to Leah's body during those 14 hours. He had charts showing how the infection spread from her appendix through her bloodstream and into her brain. He said if she'd gotten to the hospital within 2 hours, she would have had a 95% chance of full recovery. After 14 hours, the chance of avoiding brain damage was less than 5%. People in the gallery were crying when he described how the sepsis destroyed her brain tissue. The judge didn't even leave the room to decide. He ruled right there that we would share medical decisions with Hugh and the hospital as tiebreakers if we disagreed. Ashley was permanently banned from any contact with Leah. My ex had to complete parenting classes and undergo supervised visits for 6 months. The judge said the evidence of medical neglect was overwhelming and disturbing. After the hearing, Siobhan from CPS pulled me aside and said they were keeping the case open. My ex would have mandatory check-ins every month and had to complete special training for caring for medically fragile kids. She told me they were looking into criminal charges but needed more investigation. 2 days later, Matthias filed a civil suit on Leah's behalf for negligence. He said the burden of proof was lower in civil court, and we could get money for her lifetime care. My ex would have to answer questions under oath again, and this time there was no criminal standard to protect him. I put in for reassignment to a base near the hospital the same week. My commanding officer fast-tracked it even though we both knew it would hurt my career. 3 weeks later, I was at a training position 30 minutes from Leah. I went from leading combat missions to teaching basic first aid, but I could see my daughter every day. 3 months after the hearing, Leah was moved to a specialized rehab facility. The brain damage was permanent and she still needed machines for everything. But sometimes when I held her hand, she squeezed back. Not a reflex, but a real squeeze. Her eyes tracked movement sometimes too. The therapist said these were good signs, but warned me not to expect miracles. I documented every tiny response in a notebook for her medical team. The rehab place had better equipment and more specialized staff than the regular hospital. They worked with her every day on basic responses and keeping her muscles from wasting away. I learned how to do her exercises and stretches, so I could help when I visited. My ex showed up for his supervised visits but spent most of the time on his phone. The supervisor noted that he seemed uncomfortable with the medical equipment and never touched Leah without being prompted. Meanwhile, I was learning to read her monitors and adjust her position to prevent bed sores. The nurses started teaching me how to suction her breathing tube and manage her feeding pump. One day, Leah's eyes followed me across the room and stayed locked on my face when I talked to her. It wasn't much, but it was something. The neurologist said she was showing more brain activity than expected, but would never be the girl she was before. I kept fighting anyway because that's what you do for your kid. The financial planner's office was freezing, and I kept my hands wrapped around the coffee cup while she explained how special needs trusts work. She walked me through page after page of forms, showing me how the military insurance payout would go directly into the trust, how the settlement money from the civil case would be protected, how every dollar would be there for Leah no matter what happened to me. I signed my name 23 times that morning, each signature another wall between my daughter and anyone who might fail her again. The planner told me most parents don't think this far ahead, but I couldn't stop thinking about what would happen if I got deployed again, or if something happened to me, who would make sure Leah got what she needed. 2 weeks later, Matthias called to say the insurance company wanted to settle. They'd seen our evidence pile, the videos, the phone records, the expert testimony from Alfonso about how those 14 hours changed everything. My ex was finally cracking too, admitting through his lawyer that maybe Ashley shouldn't have been alone with the kids, though he still wouldn't say it was his fault for leaving her there. Matthias said they were offering $2 million, but we needed $8 million minimum for lifetime care, therapy, equipment, home modifications, everything a brain-damaged child needs for the next 60 years. I told him to hold firm. Hugh submitted his final report to the court, and Eliza forwarded me a copy that afternoon. He wrote about my daily presence at the hospital, my knowledge of every medication and machine, the way the nurses asked me questions about Leah's care because I knew more than anyone. He noted the contrast with my ex's supervised visits where he mostly sat in the corner on his phone. Hugh recommended keeping shared medical authority, but with quarterly reviews by the court to make sure both parents were staying involved. The final hearing came 3 weeks later, and I wore my dress uniform again, sitting straight while the judge read through Hugh's recommendations. He adopted every single one, setting review dates for the next 2 years, requiring both parents to attend medical appointments, mandating that any major decisions go through the hospital ethics board if we couldn't agree. My ex didn't say a word the whole time, just sat there with his jaw tight while his lawyer took notes. The judge looked right at both of us and said Leah's welfare came first, always, and any violations would mean immediate custody changes. I saw my ex's hands shake a little at that. Beryl finished her assessment report the same week, documenting 6 months of sessions where we'd worked through the trauma, the guilt, the rage that kept me up at night. She wrote that I'd developed healthy coping strategies, that my military training actually helped me compartmentalize and function, that the PTSD my ex kept claiming I had simply didn't exist. She noted that I was processing an impossible situation with remarkable stability, turning my pain into advocacy for my daughter. Every session I'd attended, every worksheet I'd completed, every technique I'd practiced became evidence that his character assassination had failed completely. 6 months to the day after that first phone call from the cabin, I was doing Leah's range of motion exercises when I felt it. Not the usual reflex when you move someone's fingers, but a real squeeze, deliberate and purposeful. I froze, scared to move, scared to hope, then squeezed back gently and felt her do it again. The physical therapist came over and tested it herself, moving Leah's hand different ways, and confirmed what I'd felt wasn't reflexive but intentional response. She warned me not to expect miracles, that this didn't mean recovery, but I didn't care because my daughter was in there somewhere, trying to reach back to me. My days settled into a routine after that, driving 30 minutes from the base to the hospital every morning, spending 4 hours with Leah doing exercises, and talking to her, then back to base for my training duties, then returning in the evening for another 2 hours. Other parents in the PICU started recognizing me, asking questions about how to navigate insurance appeals, or what lawyers to call, or how to get second opinions. One mom said I should write a guide for parents going through this, and I laughed because I was just doing what I had to do, using my combat medic training and military discipline to fight a different kind of war. I helped them anyway, sharing phone numbers and explaining forms, because nobody should have to figure this out alone while their kid is dying. And that last night before I had to fly back for the next round of settlement negotiations, I sat beside Leah's bed holding her hand, feeling for those little squeezes that came more often now. I whispered promises to her in the dark, not about miracle recoveries or happy endings, but real promises I could keep about fighting through every legal channel that existed, pursuing every medical option no matter how small the chance, making sure every system designed to protect her actually did its job. This wasn't about revenge against my ex anymore, or even about justice for what Ashley did. This was about building an iron wall of legal and financial protection around my daughter so that no one could ever fail her again. And there you have it. A story to think about and a takeaway to carry with you. Subscribe if you want more useful bits like this.